Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this extended webinar on the topic of negotiation. I say extended, really was planned for an hour. Just felt that I was going to be cramming too much into that space of time, so I've extended it out to 90 minutes. If you cannot stay the 90 minutes, I fully understand. That said, I do have a special gift for those of you who do stay for the 90 minutes, but if you don't worry about it at all. This is being recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording for being here. So without further ado, I think we should just talk about the agenda and take a look at that. So here's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to start with some universal truths about negotiation, just so we're all kind of on a level playing pitch, and we're going to use the chat function for interaction on that one. So if you wouldn't mind, just have your chat function open when we do that. Then we're going to look at the buyer's playbook. Essentially what the buyer's playbook is, looking at the advice that is given to professional buyers by professionals in that business. You know, what are the do's and don'ts, how to best manipulate salespeople. So it's kind of looking like the playbook from their side, and I think we can learn some lessons from that. Next, we're going to look at are the sources of leverage. Negotiation, if you've ever done it, you know it's all about leverage. He or she who has most leverage generally tends to come out on top. And I know this is called win-win negotiations, but you're going to see we're going to redefine what win-win means through the afternoon. What else we're going to cover? We're going to look at some buyer tactics, typical kind of moves and tactics and gambits that professional buyers use in negotiations. We're going to look at examples of those. Now, there's a lot of those, as you can well imagine. We don't have a ton of time. So what I'm going to do when we get there is I'm going to share with you what the top 12 typical ones are. We call them the dirty dozen. And I'm going to ask you to vote on the one that's the highest priority for you. So we'll run that poll, and then whatever comes back, we'll spend time on 2 to 3 of those particular tactics. Next, we're going to then look at a framework. How do we deal with price pressure? So when we get that onslaught, and I know a lot of you now this time of the year, coming up towards end of fiscal year for many of you, are going to be involved in negotiations, and you're going to come under increasing price pressure. So how can you inoculate yourself, prevent that happening? But if it does happen, how do we deal with it in a structured way? And then we're going to end it all with just a summary of some typical do's and don'ts. And as I said, I have a giveaway for you at the end if you stick around, and I'll share what that is with you later on as we go through. Okay, I think we'll kick this thing off, and going to start with some universal truths. So I've got 3 of them, and I'm going to put them up. They're more statements, and I want you to decide whether you agree or disagree with it. So here's the first statement on universal truths. So coming up shortly. Many negotiation problems are really weaknesses in the sales process that only become obvious when you go into the final negotiation. I'll read that again to you. Many negotiation problems are really weaknesses in the sales process that only become evident or obvious when you go into the final negotiations. So do you agree or disagree with that statement? Put D for disagree in the comments, and A if you agree. We have agree. They're all coming in thick and fast. Yeah, I think most people would agree with that. All right, I think we have our first universal truth. So let's take a look at the next universal truth. Negotiation success favors the brave. Agree or disagree? In the comments field now, please. Agree. We have a disagree, but we're mostly in agreement with that one. I think we had 2 disagreements come in. Okay. All right, but mostly agree. Okay. Let's look at the third one. The one with the money does not make the rules. The fact that the buyer is the one spending the money, we're saying they shouldn't make the rules. Agree or disagree with that statement? Agree. We have disagree. Agree. Okay, we're split kind of evenly down the middle on that one. Okay, so that's worth spending a little bit of time on. Here's the thing. Yeah, as I said, there's still a couple coming in. 50-50, we'll say. Is who's the one with the problem? The buyer or the seller? Who's the one with the business problem that they're trying to solve? The buyer. The buyer, okay? Yeah, in the buyer, absolutely right. So if the buyer is the one with the problem and we're the ones with the solution, why are they getting to set the rules? That's worth thinking about. We'll come back to these, okay? But just set a baseline, and I want you to think about that one. If they're the one with the problem, you go to a doctor, and you're the one with the problem, you got the money, you're the buyer, but who sets the rules? You go to an airport to kind of catch a flight, you've missed your own flight, and you go up to the counter and there's one seat left. You've the money, you're the buyer. Who sets the rules? It's worth thinking about. All right, let's move it on. So what we're going to cover next is a number of takeouts from the buyer's playbook. All of these statements that I'm about to share with you right now come from articles written by a guy called Joe Auer. Now, Joe Auer has this website. It's it's dobetterdeals.com is the website, dobetterdeals.com. Well worth your while taking a look at that website when you've got some free time. He writes a lot of articles, and he writes for procurement people, professional buyers and commodity buyers and so on. And it's always interesting to see the advice that they're receiving, because it tells us those who train well how they're going to interact with you and essentially what their playbook is. So I've taken a number of outtakes from that, and it's worth taking a look at them to see how we use these, because we're going to experience these scenarios in a negotiation. So the first one is, negotiation begins when the first person in your organization exchanges information with the vendor. You gain or lose negotiating power with every succeeding interaction. Now think about what he's saying in that one, that negotiation begins at the very first interaction with the salesperson in your organization. And leverage, power, is won or lost based on how you deal with that. So what a procurement person or professional buyer is doing all along is they're trying to limit your access to that information, because that will give you leverage. So that kind of tells us what we need to be focusing on. If you think about it, there's a couple of things. One is, they're telling us that they don't want us having access to that information early in the process because it's power. That tells us we should be getting it, and we should be focusing on that. That is a selling side issue. It is not something you go about trying to find out when you get to the negotiation stage of a process. If you haven't got it at that stage, you're probably not going to get it. So that's one. Secondly, it also helps us think about when we want to bring in procurement and buying into the conversation. Yeah, it's a good idea to bring them in and control that process, but you don't want to bring them in too early. So you want to get all that information kind of under the radar before procurement become alerted to the fact. Once they're alerted to it and there's a formal process in place, we all know it's no longer selling. You're not in that selling stage anymore. You're just kind of administering a process at that stage. So that's the first takeout from the buyer playbook. Let's take a look at the next one. The customer is the buyer and the vendor is only one of potential suppliers. You've got what all sellers want or vendors want, the money. Now, think about this one. This runs counter to one of the universal truths we were talking about at the beginning, where the one with the money does not make the rules. Here's the thing. If you went into a situation, a sales situation or a negotiation situation, and you went in and you had 10 million euros in your own personal bank account, would you really be attached to the outcome? Would you really fall foul to this, where they're going, look, you've got the power, and you're going to let them know it. You're going to and use it against the seller. You wouldn't, right? So that's why, for those of you who've ever been in a program with me and you've heard me talk about the need for that mentality of I'm financially independent and I don't need the business. This is one of the reasons why you absolutely need it. And if you think about it, it's kind of arrogant, The customer is the buyer and the vendor is only the potential suppliers, one of potential suppliers. But why not just flip that around and say that the buyer is only one of many buyers open to me? I've only got a finite amount of time. I can't spend that time with all the potential buyers out there. So I'm going to pick and choose the buyers I want to work with. And you as the buyer are only one of many potential buyers that I have. What have we got here? In that quote, he said, when our organization begins exchanging information with the vendor, we the buyer in this quote disagree with the quote's implications. So what the quote is, this is advice that he's giving to procurement people, not to salespeople. So that's why it's called the buyer's playbook. I'm opening it up saying this is what the advice they get. So in that context, it does fit if you kind of read back. If we have time, I'll skip back to it at the end and we'll look at it again. But everything that I'm putting up here under the buyer's playbook, who's asked that? David, is from the point of view of the buyer. That's the advice that they're given in terms of how they interact with salespeople. So what they're saying is, look, we the customer, we're the king. And the salesperson is only the pleb. That's essentially what he's saying here. And we should let them know that. And that they've got what all salespeople want, the money. Well, hang on a second. Don't you have what all buyers need? A solution. They're the one with the business problem. It's worth remembering that. So that's the second of the playbook outtakes. Here's another one. At negotiation time, the vendor's sales representative has projected to his management that the deal with the customer has already been sold. Use this to your advantage, since the sales rep has placed the pressure on himself to close the deal. So what he's saying to procurement people is, all the pressure's on the salesperson because they've forecasted this deal, and now the pressure's on them. Sucks to be them, eh? Well, there's an antidote to this as well. Make sure you've got a really good pipeline and that you don't forecast something too early either, because he's right. When we do put that pressure on ourselves, which is mad. So take his advice. Here's another one. The customer does have alternative vendors, approaches, and deal timing, and both sides should be aware of that during negotiations. Well, is that true? Does the customer have alternative vendors? There may be. The organization may have, but I'll tell you who doesn't have alternative vendors. The procurement people, because they don't get to decide who the organization does business with. And this is why it's so important to be engaged with that organization early on, where you're uncovering the stakeholders in the organization, their head of finance, the head of sales, the head of marketing, whomever you're dealing with, and you're understanding their reasons for doing business. And you've identified the willingness of the organization to invest the money, and you've uncovered how they do make decisions. Well, no procurement person is ever going to come in and overrule that. Procurement people see those internal stakeholders as their customer. That's who they're working for. And even just on a political level, they're never going to overrule it. Think about it for a second. Procurement person comes and says, I know you want vendor A, but I think you should buy vendor B because they're cheaper. Now, imagine they made that decision and then vendor B screws up. It's all on them. Who's going to ever put themselves in that situation? So we got to differentiate here between the procurement and the organization. Now, does the organization have alternative vendors? Sure they do. But remember, you have alternative buyers. You have other people in your pipeline, other organizations, other opportunities in your pipeline. You don't need this deal. And that's a really, really important mindset, not just during negotiations, but during the whole entire sales cycle. And deals timings, we're going to be looking at this whole thing about timing as a source of leverage later on, so I'll hold back comments on that till then. And he says both sides should be aware of this during negotiations. That's something else we're going to look at when it comes to leverage. All right, a couple more. Ignore this, I like this one. Ignore vendors' claims when they say early in the negotiations that that's the best deal we can give you. So ignore them when they say, look, that's the best offer you're going to get. Well, if they don't believe your words, what do they believe? We're going to be looking at that when we come to this style and how you might push back on a procurement person's pressure. That's going to be important as well, because they don't believe your words. But at some stage, they have to believe that there's nothing left. And really, should you really wait until you have nothing left to position it that way? What if, for example, and I'm not suggesting you give concessions in any negotiation. Remember, we've all agreed that they're just often there as a fix for something that's gone or missing in the sales process. But should you do that, and should you have, say, room to, let's say, keep this really simple, discount 5 percentage points? Well, do you wait until all 5 percentage points disappear before you're exasperated and you say to the buyer, look, there's nothing more I can give, that's it, it's over, it's done? Or could you act as if a couple of points earlier in the process, so that your tonality, your body language, everything screams at the buyer that there's nothing left to give? Because you see, they don't believe your words, but they do believe what you give off in terms of tonality and body language. So we're now introducing the importance of being able to act as a vital tool in the negotiator's arsenal. Because I can tell you what, for nothing, that buyers are really good actors. I've seen them. I remember one of my jobs, I was working in Motorola, and I was working for the UK office, but I was based in Ireland. So I had a desk in the middle of a factory in County Dublin, and I was in the middle of the procurement section for 5 years. That was my desk. So I got to see and got to listen and got to experience these professional procurement people firsthand and how they interacted. And I remember one particular buyer, her name was Andrea, she was brilliant. I remember one scenario where, and I was flabbergasted just watching this, that the line was shut down, or was going to shut down the next day, which meant 200 people with nothing to do, they're going to be sent home. This was huge cost to the organization and huge embarrassment. And they were missing this one small component, or they were going to run out in 24 hours. That was it. She's on the phone. Now, she should have been on the phone. Please, 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 can you help us out? Our line is about to go down tomorrow. We won't be able to produce the batteries, and that means the radios there, like walkie-talkies, won't ship. All the blah blah blah. Can you please help us out? I don't care how much it costs. That wasn't her approach. She was on the phone and she was making it as if this was an opportunity for the vendor to be a supplier. And she was saying, look, thinking about maybe opening some of these lines of components up to other vendors, thought maybe, we'll give you a shot here. Can you, if we send over the spec sheet, could you tell us if this is something that you can supply? And it was just, she was calmness personified. It was unbelievable. I remember she turned around, I'm literally beside her, and she turned around with this big smile on her face. She was so enjoying the process of winding up these vendors and having them run around, jump through hoops and sing and dance, and it was it was an incredible thing to watch. Was she acting? Absolutely, she was acting. All right, next one. If you haven't heard a no, this is an important one. If you haven't heard a no from the vendor, or haven't experienced a deadlock, impasse, or some form of breakdown because you haven't asked, or you haven't gotten, best deal, or you haven't asked for enough, you haven't gotten the best deal possible. Essentially what he's saying is that if negotiations haven't broken down, you haven't asked for enough. You need to go and ask for more. And this is really important because a lot of people fear this. They fear that when a negotiation breaks down and the buyer is kind of disconnecting from the process, we panic and we go into kind of how do we get them back mode. When in reality, they've designed this all along to squeeze as much out of you as possible, so that when you get to that stage where you absolutely do throw your hands in the air, then they go, okay, let's do business. And so what's really important about this is, if this is going to happen, and you're dealing now, I'm talking about with professional buyer here, not just somebody in the organization, but professional procurement. If this is going to happen, do you want to be in control of that process, or do you want the buyer to be in control of that process? My view on it is, if it's going to be a breakdown, well, why not you be in the control of that? Why not you bring about the breakdown and say, look, unfortunately, on this case, I don't think we're going to be able to do business. But look, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity. Maybe next time. You bring it and then see what happens. And that's why I say, by the way, only the brave really, really are effective in negotiations. If you're risk adverse, you're going to be afraid to do that. So some of these moves really do require a backbone. A couple of others for you. Here's a list. And it's kind of a rather long list. What it says is, never believe a seller when they say, here's the first one, how much you're willing, never believe a salesperson when they tell you, how much you're willing to spend or what your budget is. I got that mixed up, sorry, that headline is wrong. So what they're basically saying is never tell a vendor how much you're willing to spend or what your budget is. Let me correct that. Never tell a vendor you have a deadline for the project. Never tell a vendor you love their product. Now, what I'd like you to do is, in the comments, as soon as you see this resonating, as soon as you see some of these statements and you go, oh yeah, I've experienced that, that's exactly what happens to me, I just want you to put agree in, or A will do, in the comments. So, and see how far back. Oh, but you have people in already saying, yeah, I recognize this. Well, watch this. Here's a few more. Never tell a vendor who its competitors are. Never tell a vendor who won the bid. Never tell a vendor if it's the only vendor being considered, even if it is. Never tell a vendor you need its product. Never tell a vendor the bids you've received from other vendors. Never tell a vendor that you prefer its product over the competitor's products. And never tell a vendor anything that could give it leverage during the final decision-making process. And never tell a vendor exactly how much you plan to buy. And never tell a vendor its price is reasonable. Sometimes, just going back to the comments here, hang on a second. Sometimes I think buyers will say they love something to hook the seller in and get them excited to give them more free consulting. You're absolutely right on that one, David. That is a tactic they'll often use as well, that they're really nice to you. And that's usually a sign there's a problem ahead, that they're only being nice to you to keep you in the race so that they can beat other vendors up. That's a game they play all the time. What else have we got? There are some of the questions I ask as a vendor up front. Great one. Good point. Thanks, James. Another tactic is we need it immediately. It can be, absolutely, yeah. So, but what we can see here is these are all games that professional procurement people play, and therefore we need to have the strategies and tactics to be prepared for these, to avoid them if at all possible. And if we can't avoid them, then certainly how do we dig ourselves out of the hole? So that's essentially where we're going to go from here. We're going to look next at some of the sources of leverage. And then, as I said, we're going to look at tactics and a structure for dealing with those. So next is leverage. I want to, before we get into what the exact sources are, here's a quote from Archimedes. Archimedes said that, give me a place to stand and I can move the world. And basically what he was saying is, if I have a stand and a lever long enough and a place to put it, that I can move anything. And essentially, that's what he was talking about here in terms of leverage. And so, as we go through these examples, what I want you to think about is how these sources of leverage, what they do is they act to move the fulcrum in this picture. You can imagine if we were to shift that fulcrum towards the 10 kilograms end, the further it gets towards there, the easier it is to lever it up. But if you were to move it back the other direction, the harder it's going to be to lever it up. So bear that in mind. Essentially what we're doing with this process is moving the fulcrum point. The more sources of leverage that we have, the more we move it to our advantage. Now, of course, the flip side of leverage is vulnerability, and that we also want to be careful we don't make ourselves vulnerable in these scenarios as well. So bear that in mind. A couple of things that we're going to do on this is we're going to look at what leverage is. And I'm going to do that by way of a quick story. Some years, I'm going to say I was probably in business about 6 months, and in Sander, was that 18 years ago. And I was got to a stage with a prospect where they said, yeah, the head of sales, I want to do this. And he said to me, but look, Paul, you're going to have to go through procurement. There's nothing I can do. That's our policy. That's fine. Long story short, procurement person is on the line. Here's the thing. I had 3, maybe 4 weeks money left in the bank account. Then I'm out of business. And this was my only real prospect. There was not, and it was a good one. It was not alone was it good money, it was a big name. And if I didn't get this deal, that's it. I'm out of business. There's no question about it. In the comments field now, who has leverage in this situation? The buyer or Paul? Right, Paul, if you think Paul has the leverage, or B for buyer is fine. Just in the comments field now. Buyer, buyer, buyer. Yeah, buyer, buyer, buyer. Okay. I'm going to tell you that that's not true. And here's why. Because that buyer did not know my situation. She did not know that I only had 3 or 4 weeks. As far as she's concerned, I could have gone for another year. She didn't know that. And therefore, that's the key in this, is that the leverage, unless it's explicit, unless it's understood, unless it's known and out in the open, it's not really leverage. It can't be used. Now, could I let that get inside my head and worry me? Yeah, that's true. But I didn't, because we're taught to, remember, you got 10 million euros in your own bank account. I'm financially independent. I don't need the business. Now, that's a state of mind, but it's a powerful one, because when you're in that state of mind, you're not psychologically in a vulnerable position from a leverage perspective. You're in just as a strong position, because state of mind wise, you're not running out of business. You're financially independent. You don't need the business. So that really is important. The state of mind, it's negotiation is a mental game, far more than it is a tactile or a game of strategy, unless you consider mental strategy as part of that. But it is a mental game. Think about somebody playing poker and you don't know what hand they have. Well, what do you do to try and read their hand? And if you knew what hand they had, how would you play the game differently? Negotiation is not a lot different to that. As I said, it's only leverage if the other person knows it. That's important. Okay. But if he or she knows it, by the way, you're absolutely right. If she knew, that is Giampiero, if she knew my scenario, absolutely should have had me over a barrel. There's no question about it. And that's why, if you go back to the buyer's playbook, why they say don't tell salespeople, don't give them information, because that gives them leverage that they can use later on in negotiation. Absolutely. That's why. But this is our situation as well. We may be under pressure. We have targets to reach. If we allow that to infect us, psychologically we give leverage away straight away, and that's a shame. All right, let's look at this next one. I want you to imagine this scenario where you're driving along and you're behind this car, and the car stops suddenly and you smash into the back of it. Who has leverage, right? It's the person who's smashed into, right? In that, certainly the laws in this country are that even if you stop, brake hard, if somebody smashes into the back of you, they're in the wrong, because they should have left enough space. Okay? So that's the scenario. So now the person behind you have leverage if you've been smashed into. I kind of got this wrong now, because I'm trying to think, when you get out of the car, that was it. Sorry, I know what it is. Yeah, you've been smashed into. So, I'll start again, right? Rewind. You have smashed into the back of this other car, and they have leverage. Got that? Okay, so you're screwed. You should have left enough space. And so you get out of the car, kind of sheepish, it's your fault. You walk into the other car to apologize. This person winds down their window, and you get this smell of alcohol coming out of the car. Now who has leverage? Now the point of that story is, or that example is, because it's an example, it didn't happen to me, promise you, is that leverage can change in an instant. That fulcrum can switch based on information, or something's happened and something's changed. And that's worthwhile keeping in mind as we go through these as well. So these are not fixed, they're not set in stone. Here we go. So these are 8 sources of leverage that we're going to talk about. First one is belief. And belief is a very, very powerful form of leverage, in that if we believe a particular vendor is the best vendor, that gives the best value for money. We'll be there when there's a problem that we can trust. If that belief, that conviction is there, that can give us leverage. Certainly going into a negotiation, we know that that the brand, the experience has been a powerful one, and that when push comes to shove, that they're less likely to go with somebody else because their belief is that you are a better vendor, regardless of their experience. Maybe they haven't dealt with you, but you came recommended, as an example. And there's also other forms of belief in terms of, in a given situation, what I believe to be true about the offering of the other person, how they're going to work with us, etc. All of that can go into a person's attitude and how they deal with this in a negotiation. So it can be a form of vendor. As in, for example, if I believe that as a seller going in to deal with a procurement person, that I'm only being brought in to make up the numbers. If my belief is that they'll never buy from us, that they've always bought from somebody else, that's going to make me very vulnerable in negotiations as a counter to that as well, without evidence. And we do this all the time in life, in sales. We have these beliefs and we act it out as if they're true without really interrogating them. So that can be one form of leverage. Another one is emotion. And this one, what you'll find with some of these is that they overlap, because emotion and timing can overlap with one another as well. But certainly if we're attached, and that's the key word here, that if we're attached to a particular outcome, we need the deal. And we're emotionally involved because we're under pressure and timing's running out and we know that our job is going to be in jeopardy. So we're feeling it. Well, that's often used as a form of leverage by buyers. They're very, very good at that. A lot of the tactics that they use will tap into that, will tap into try and make you feel like you're losing the deal and feel that it's going away from you, and that if you don't do something quickly, you're going to lose the deal. And it's designed to kind of get our inner child to worry, and as a result then make concessions, or to come in and rescue them. A lot of the tactics, for example, are your competition is cheaper. You know, their inference is that if you don't sharpen your pencil, the business is going to go away. Well, how does that make you feel? Or they'll say something like, our budgets have been cut. In other words, what are you going to do about it? And if you don't work with this, well then, what does that say about you as a vendor? All of these are used to design to get us emotionally involved. Now, the flip side to that is that emotion is used by really, really good sellers in the sales process, and it's designed to get the prospect to open up and talk about their issues, their challenges, their concerns, their frustrations, their worries, their desires, etc. All of that is emotional. We talk about in the sales how we buy emotionally and only justify our decisions intellectually. And what happens then, and any of you who have ever dealt with professional procurement people will know this, is they try to come in and then take all of that away as if to say, well, look, you're just one of many vendors. It's no different to us if we buy from you versus somebody else, and we really don't have any pain. We just want a lower price. And what they're trying to do is make themselves less vulnerable to emotion as a source of leverage. So that's really, really important, one of the key ones. Here's another one, need. If you need something, as in maybe you've got a deadline coming up, a buyer has to spend money by a particular date, or they lose their budget, for example, or they have to have a piece of infrastructure, for example, up and running by a certain deadline, and therefore they need to have it in place. Or it could be that they need to have it in place because they lose resources at a certain time and date, and so on and so on. And if we know that, we know they need to have it by a certain date, for example, then that's a source of leverage. Now, two other sources of leverage have all automatically, if you think about it, are now overlapping with that. There is if you know, which is understanding, which is a source of leverage you'll see in a moment. And then also timing, we introduce it to if they need to have it by, if you know that they need it by a certain date. That's three sources of leverage all in one, combining to give you really a kind of a powerful position relative to the buyer. Likewise, they will often try to do the opposite with you. If you think about it, what they're trying to do is if if they know that you need to have a deal by a certain date, by the end of quarter or the end of year, and we've communicated that because we do, then that gives them leverage. That's not good either. All right, let's keep going. Timing. This is probably the key one of the 8 sources of leverage. Is that a key one that we give it away so easily. We say to prospects, if you can do it by this date, we'll give you a discount. 2 things have happened. One is you've just told them that you need it by a certain date. And 2, the discount thing, you've just used one of the oldest tactics in the book that they don't care about and they don't respond to, because they know if they come back the following month or the following quarter, they will get the exact same deal, not a problem. Why do we do this? Because we think it creates a sense of urgency, but it doesn't. Because the buyer doesn't care. Or at least they're not going to show you their hand that they care. And if we did, so here's the thing. If a buyer, let's say, needed it by, what are we now, October, by the end of October, they absolutely had to have something in place, generically, right? Had to have it in place. But your end of quarter was the end of October. They knew that because you told them. They're going to use that against you. But if you didn't know that they needed to have it, you're in a position of weakness. If you knew they had to have it in place, you could then use that as a source of leverage against them. And I'm going to show you a couple of tactics on how to do that, how to free yourself up from end of year pressure or end of quarter pressure, and how to reestablish. Because remember, we did say that leverage can change in an instant based on a piece of information. So even if you have given away some leverage and made yourself vulnerable, there are ways to counteract that, which we're going to look at as well when we get to tactics. What else do we have? Relationship, definitely a source of leverage. If you have a really strong relationship with somebody, not alone can that help in terms of the final decision making, but just in the insights and the inside track and the white knight effect, where they're helping you and giving you inside information as to where you stand. I'll give you a perfect example of this as well. I remember years ago, actually it was this exact same scenario I was telling you about earlier, where I was 6 months into the business and I'm with this procurement person. Well, let me rewind. I was with the head of sales. We talked about the program and he said, yeah, want to do this. And then when we got to talking about money, he said, look, no matter what I agree with you, you had to go through procurement. That was the setup. I said, fine. And I'd come out and spent 5 years sitting in procurement and kind of had a sense of the animal that I was dealing with. So I put a call into the company. Now it was somebody I knew in the company, was not a senior person at all, quite junior in fact. And I said, look, I need a favor. I need to ask a question, or I need you to ask a question for me. If there's a battle, if there's a fight between my guy, the head of sales, and procurement, who wins? And this friend of mine came back and, a day or two later and said, I've asked around, he wins. He was a senior guy, and obviously he's that's who procurement serve. And I can't begin to underestimate how important that was to know that, or what it did to my backbone going into those negotiations with procurement, and how I was able to stand my ground and not give an inch in terms of discounts. Because I knew he wanted it and they were not going to be able to overrule him. That's no matter what they said, it didn't make a difference. And of course they tried to position themselves as the kingmakers in this organization. And I knew, and that was based on relationship and information. Again, you can see how the two can often overlap. I use my relationship to get information, which is another form or another element of understanding. Somebody help me out here. Source of leverage, thank you. Another source of leverage is your understanding of the organization. So when you understand more about the impact of the problem on the organization, how it's impacting the various different departments, sectors, in people and so on, and you have an understanding of how their budgetary system works and how their decision-making process works. When you understand all of that, you are in a much better position and a much stronger position. And to give you an example of this, actually it was that organization again, it was a 6-month program I was working on, and towards the end of it, a few of the sales reps said to me, Paul, have you anything on how to work with professional procurement people? And remember, this is a massive, massive, massive IT organization. So they have their own procurement department. And I said to these sales reps, have you ever spoken to your own procurement people and ever sat down with them, bought them a cup of coffee and said, listen, I'd like some inside tips here? And none of them had done it. And that's tip number one. If you work in a big organization and you have your own procurement people, sit down with them. They will give you their playbook. They will give you the inside track because you're both on the same team. So we did this, and we spent a best part of a day doing exercises and Q&As and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I wrote this role play, and I probably used it 100, 150 times since doing negotiation classes. And the role play was written that there was two sales teams, and there was a team of buyers. And both sales teams were given the same information, as in it was the same scenario was in both role plays, except in one was the selling team, they had a lot of information about their buyer organization. They understood what the problems were, how it was impacting the organization, how it was impacting the key players, how much it was costing, how urgent it was, what their timelines were, how decisions were getting made, what the budget was, right? The other team had information, but it was a lot lighter. It was really surface level stuff and preferences without really going deep. And I'm going to say I've run that role play, as I said, well over 100 times. And I can't think of one single situation where the team with more information, with a greater understanding, didn't come out on top and get significantly more as a result of their negotiations. Understanding is a powerful, powerful source of leverage. But like all of the others, it's a selling side issue. You get the leverage and sometimes give it away in sales, in the sales process before you ever get to negotiation. And that's worth remembering, that by the time you get to negotiation, you either have this thing in the bag or you don't. That should be your thinking, and that should be the real situation. And then the last one is skill, because even with the best will in the world, with all that information, understanding their needs, understanding their timing, having them emotionally involved where they absolutely want what you have, having the belief and conviction that you're the best organization to address this. Let's say all of that is in place and you've done a fantastic job on sales. When you're dealing with professional procurement people, that's still not enough to stop them coming in and trying all the tactics in the world. And these people are incredibly skilled. They meet salespeople almost every day. And their skill level is just off the charts, the ones who really, really do a good job. And if you're not equally skilled, you're going to get creamed. There's no question about it. So skill is a really important form of leverage, and lack of it is a huge vulnerability. There's no question about it. So with that in mind, we should probably take a look at what some of those skills are. And moving on. Oh, ownership, I forgot there was one last one. Ownership is just emotional ownership, is where we involve the buyer in defining the solution. That if they've been part of that process, they feel they have emotional ownership. It's like their fingerprints are on it. And that gives you huge leverage as well, particularly against a competitor where they haven't done that and the buyer hasn't been involved with them to the same extent. It does dovetail with relationship as well. It certainly feeds into that. But the fact that they've co-developed, and that's why, as a sort of a side issue, my preference is always is if people ask me to do a proposal, my answer is no. Now, I don't necessarily say no. What I do is I go back with an alternative suggestion, something like, I say, why don't we do this? Why don't we set aside an hour and we'll get in pre-COVID it would have been, we'll get a whiteboard in a quiet room together. Now it's just, we'll get a whiteboard and we'll map out what it is you're looking to achieve and where the obstacles are, and we'll kind of dovetail in some ideas and solutions in there and essentially kind of bring that to a point where we can capture it all into a document. I'll write it up and send it back to you. And I've never had anybody say no to that suggestion yet, never. And the thing about it is, my goal with that is to have them have their fingerprints all over the solution, that they felt that they were involved in developing the solution, even though I'm asking the questions and maybe making the suggestions and giving the examples, and they're nodding their head and going, yeah, but you're kind of like, it's like you're handing the pen to them and involving them in the process too. And that's then gives you, as ownership, a very powerful source of leverage going into final negotiations. Okay, where have we got to? Yeah, we kind of dealt with those. Emotion, understanding. I had those in as the kind of top three that I see the most, where the emotion is that we feel under pressure to give away concessions at the end of the process because we lack understanding in terms of how the organization really works and where the real pain is, and we put ourselves under pressure from a timing perspective because we give away that information by suggesting that we'll give discounts if they can sign by a certain date. We signal that. It's the first thing a good buyer will do. They will go to your website and look up when your end of year is and then divide that by 4 to figure out when your end of quarters are. And they will use that against you. There's no question about it. You've all seen that, I'm sure, many times. All right, so let's look at tactics. And what I suggested I'm going to do on this is go through, there's 12 I've picked out, and some of them are self-explanatory, and some of them I'm just going to give you a brief explanation of what they are, and then I'm going to run a quick poll and ask you to vote for your preferred one. Now, the only thing is the poll only gives me 10 options, so I've left the last 2 out. If you feel they should be there, put those in the comments, there's no question, and I can cover them. All right, so let's look at this. The 12 are, I'll start with the flinch. The flinch is just essentially when somebody goes, how much? That's all. It's like, it's hot. It's almost like, how much you expect me to pay that? That's all the flinch is. I'm sure you've heard it many, many times. The next one is your competition is cheaper. That's self-explanatory, is exactly what it says in the tin, where the buyer says, you know, your competition is cheaper, or I can get this for less, or any form of somebody else is cheaper. Third one is higher authority, lower authority. It's often used by buyers to kind of say, it's almost like they take all your concessions, everything that you're going to give, and then when they've got what looks like a final agreement on the table, they go, okay, I just need to run this by my boss. Now, guess what the boss wants to do? You got it, right? The boss just wants to come back and get some more. And because we're emotionally involved, now remember we talked about emotion as sources of leverage. Now we're using it as a source of vulnerability, where because we've invested all this time and we had a deal on the table and we were just so close, imagine how you feel. Now that's used against you by using this particular tactic, the higher authority, lower authority. Good cop, bad cop. Again, you've heard this many, many times. It was funny. I was telling you that example in the company where I got the buyers in, and these were professional procurement people. That's all they did all day long. And we spent the day doing Q&As and so on. And one of the questions one of the reps asked them, you know, was, what's the kind of the last step you take before you go in and meet the salesperson or the sales team? And I always thought it was really funny. She said, and she was pointing to her colleague, and she said, we just agree between us who's going to play good cop and who's going to play bad cop. And I just thought that was so telling. It just, you know, told me again, this is just a game to them. And it's almost like, you know, well, it's my turn to be bad cop today. I want to be bad cop. No, I want to be bad cop. And it's funny the way it plays out. But essentially, it can be done like that in that scenario if you're dealing with 2 people. But it's often done with somebody who will say to you, look, you deal with me. My boss is a son of a bitch. You do not want to deal with my boss. He or she is a real hard ass. They'll chew you up. They don't even like your company. But look, I tell you, you work with me. And it's done like that. So they're positioning themselves as a good cop. And don't you worry, I'll keep you away from this Rottweiler over here. And you kind of go, oh, okay. That's how it works. Very effective psychological tactic. A hot potato, one of my favorite ones as well, is where they'll say something like, look, I'd love to do business, but look, our budgets have been cut. And essentially what a hot potato is like, here's my problem, now it's yours. And they toss it to you, and now you've got this hot potato, and you got to decide what you're going to do with it. That's quite a psychologically powerful tactic as well. Emotional outburst is another one where just somebody goes crazy and says, what? You expect me to? No, I'm not going to do it because the neighbors will be knocking on the windows if I do it. But like they just kind of go crazy, and I haven't seen it myself too much. I'll be honest. I've heard of lots of examples from people who've experienced it where people will literally, throw papers across the room and demand. It's the old Khrushchev one where back in the Cuban Missile Crisis negotiations, apparently, again, I wasn't there, where he took his shoe off and started banging the shoe on the table. But it's any sense of somebody losing their head. And again, it's often done for effect because they have learned through life that they get their way when they throw their rattle out of their pram and start getting upset. And what we do is we go in to try and mollycoddle them and tell them, look, it'll be okay. And it's mad. It's mad. All right, next one, fait accompli. Fait accompli is where somebody takes something and now says, okay, it's mine. And if you want it back, I can give it back to you, but it'll cost you. And you actually see this quite a lot. It's used, for example, one country invades another country and takes some territory, annexes territory. And then what they do is, in negotiations to end the conflict, they use that territory as negotiation power. The fact that they shouldn't have been there in the first place is irrelevant. You'll see it in real life, as in buyer-seller situations, where somebody might take, for example, a discount but not place the order by a certain date, or take the discount for payment by a certain date, but then say, oh, by the way, we're going to take our 90 days. So they take it, and then it's fait accompli, it's already done. And there are other examples of that as well, where somebody takes something, and it's like, you'll see, again, it's great watching real life. You'll see a lot of these tactics play out. For example, if you look at negotiations at the moment between the EU and the UK about the withdrawal negotiations, you'll see a lot of these tactics already. Sometimes this is called a straw man. It's where you put something up as a big issue that really wasn't a big issue in the first place, and then you say, okay, well, if I'm going to take it away, well, it's going to cost you. It's like, if I give this up, then I need you to give up something in return. That's a form of fait accompli as well. You see it with the UK, where they're now changed an element of the Northern Ireland agreement, and they've enshrined it into law, and the EU are jumping up and down and going crazy. My gut feel is that's just a negotiation tactic, that they will give it up, something that they didn't have in the first place, if you think about it, but they're now giving it away as a concession because, look, this is on our statute books, it's a law, and if we're going to give this, then I need this in return. That's how fait accompli works. BAFO, best and final offer. It's exactly what it is, where you are asked by this is typically one you'll only get with procurement. You'll very rarely see an average negotiator, meaning that, say, this is the head of sales or head of IT, do this. It's a real procurement move. And it's like they want you to sell in your best and final offer, which of course they take, and then they come back and go, this is not good enough, we need you to do better because your competition's cheaper, or blah, 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 right? Or they'll flinch and do all of that other good stuff. So it's a mistake to send it that way. However, stonewalling is where you're in communication, everything's going fine, and you're getting towards the end of quarter or the end of year, and then nothing. Incommunicado. They're not returning your phone calls, they're not returning your emails, and you're just stuck. That's what stonewalling is. Nibbling is just people just, depends on the business you're in, but take it a little bit more, well, if we take that, I want the training for free, or I want this, and it's just it doesn't feel like, each particular concession doesn't feel like a lot, but when you add them up, they can be a lot. That's all nibbling is. Changing the rules, again, it's kind of like what it says in the tin, where you'll often see it, is where you're dealing with a negotiation team, you have everything agreed, and then the team changes and somebody else comes in and says, they take everything that's been agreed so far, and they say, well, look, we need to expand this project, we need to reconsider some of the inputs, and we're going to make it 6 months instead of 9 months, or whatever it is. It doesn't make a difference. It's that they're changing the ground rules but keeping the concessions. But the ground rule changes are never in your favor. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an issue. And escalating is, again, where somebody will often, again, this won't be right for every business, but what it is where somebody asks you, say, for a quote on, let's say, 1,000 widgets. And they're going to place that order by the end of the month. And so you go and I'm going to assume that 1,000 widgets is a big deal. And you go give them the best quote for that 1,000 widgets. And then they come back and they place an order for 100. But they take the price, the component price for the 1,000. And again, you do see it in some businesses, certainly not in every. I used to see it a lot in when I worked in Motorola, and we dealt with semiconductors, and they were unit prices, and you'd always at the start of the year, the blue sky, or the vendors we dealt with would blue sky the size of the opportunity, so you learn very quickly to put in breakpoints and so on. However, they're the 12 the dirty dozen we're going to talk about. So what I am going to do next is I'm going to run a little poll, and I want you to vote on the top two, your top one, and I'll take two, maybe three if we have time, and deal with those. So I'm going to launch the poll, and you tell me which one that is a higher priority for you, the one you want to spend most time on. Here we go. So we have them coming in. Going to run that for another 10 seconds. Your competition is cheaper, seems to be winning so far. Lower authority, higher authority is coming in next. Keep going, Bafo's up there. Keep going. Take another 5 seconds before we close that poll. Keep going. A few more. We've got 68% voting, and so far 69%. 5, 4, closing. Let's end that poll. So we have your competition is cheaper is the winner. Hot potato is second, and then I have Bafo is third. So there's the results of what we did. So by a long stretch, I think we have your competition is cheaper. So we're going to start with that first, and I'll just keep an eye on time. Okay, cool. I'm going to maybe do 5-10 minutes on this. Okay, your competition is higher. Let me close that poll. Oh, stop sharing it. There we go. Your competition is cheaper. There are a number of different ways of dealing with this, and it really does depend on when you hear it, when it comes out. Now, obviously, we're talking about negotiations, but it's really the context of what went before. It's important. And so, for example, there's a number of different tactics you can use. Your competition are cheaper. You could say, and. Now, I am basing this answer on the fact that you are in a strong position. You've got a lot of leverage, and you have been with the business. You have understood their pain, all three levels. You've talked money, and all that's fine, and you've understood. You're with the decision makers. All that's good, right? You're in a strong position. And somebody says to you, your competition is cheaper. Okay, you must be telling me that for a reason. You could do that. Okay. I know some of you won't like that. Some of you go, oh, I like that. I'll use that. That's fine. You could say your competition is cheaper. You could then, something like this, you could say, well, look, I appreciate that. But look, thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it. Maybe next time we'll find a better fit. Now, what we're doing with that first step one is just struggling. Just kind of going, listen, appreciate you letting me know. It's like you're accepting defeat. And I want you to communicate that in your tone, because I want them to go, what? Right? So this is what's called a pattern interrupt. See, you got to look at what are they expecting you to say when they say your competition is cheaper. They're expecting you to say, okay, well, what do we have to beat, right? And so what we want to do is make sure we don't do that. We do something like the opposite. Well, look, thanks anyway. I appreciate the opportunity. It's unfortunate we didn't make it this time. Now, what we're doing is forcing them to come out and say, no, I'm not saying that, right? So, and that's some form of retreat you're going to get from this, or some sort of, well, what do you mean? Are you not going to try and beat it? I said, well, look, I don't understand you're going to get it cheaper somewhere else. I mean, if I got something cheaper somewhere else, assuming everything else is the same, I'd bite their hand off. Would you not? Now, you're looking for, again, the reaction on this one, because we know that no procurement person cares about it being cheaper. I know they say they do, but here's the thing. It's not their money, but it is their ass on the line if something goes wrong. And again, I'm assuming that you've done all that work in the sales side and that you are in a strong position and you know you have leverage. That's really important because that allows you then to act this way. And all I want to do then is put the buyer on the back foot. I have a few comments come in, and what are they saying is, okay, can we do the same with stonewalling, create a reaction? You can do, absolutely, yeah. If you're in a really, really powerful position and they're chasing you, can you kind of go, yeah, look, I'll get back to you, I'm tied up. Yeah, you could. I certainly wouldn't jump when they say jump. There's no question about that. What else do we have? Need to jump to the next meeting. Okay, that's a problem. Can we question them more and dig more? Okay, yeah, you can, but that really needs to be done on the sales side. This is you're now in a negotiation, and I'm assuming you're with procurement. And they won't allow that. They're not going to allow to open up and start asking questions. Or if they do, they share that with everybody else. So that's not a position you want to be in. So all we're going to do is this: know that what we've got has value. Know that it's worth paying for because the business wants it. Now you've just got to play the game with procurement. So this particular tactic, again, there's several tactics, is you're just retreating and you're saying, look, I understand, because that forces them to come out. Go, no, I'm not saying that, but look, would you not kind of match them on price? Now we're into the next level, which is something like, and you could go straight here, by the way, you don't have to go through this process. You could simply go, well, your competition is cheaper. Say, well, look, let me ask you this. Are you looking for cheapest? Now, the answer to that will always be no. But you can preempt any yes by saying, look, are you looking for cheapest? Because I've been doing this job 15 years and we're never cheapest. In fact, we're usually substantially more expensive than everybody else. Does the fact that we're more expensive mean it's over? Or you could say it's the fact that we're more expensive. Why don't we talk about what you need to hear, what you need to get for you to feel it was worth paying more? Either way, we're not going to cheap and we're not going to chase them down that rabbit hole because there's nothing good at the end of that. Remember, one of the key rules in negotiation, what gets rewarded gets repeated. And if you give a discount or concessions at this stage, you are toast. There's no question about it. So your competition is cheaper. Just let's recap. You could just kind of play the look or you tell me that for a reason. And again, they're not just going to say nothing. They're going to come back on that. But it does buy you some time. And they're going to come back and say, well, look, they're cheaper. So, you know, what a good buyer will say, they'll commoditize you. They'll say, well, look, we don't see any other advantage other than price. That's when I would say, well, look, based on that, if you're going to go with cheapest, we're never cheapest. So I guess what you're doing is telling me that it's over. I'll try that with a buyer, and I guarantee you, if they say it's over, you were never considered in the first place. Never. Unless you want to be cheapest, in which case, that's not a sales job. You don't pay salespeople good money to go out and always be cheapest or ever be cheapest. Anybody can do that. Anybody can go to a buyer and say, listen, when you've got all your quotes, come back to me and I'll always beat it. That's not a salesperson. That's a clerk. Salespeople are there to find out what people are willing to pay more for and then charge that and stand behind it and plant your feet and don't wimp. That's what I would do on any of those. Your competition is cheaper. Can you give me an example how to overcome stonewalling? All right, I can, Niels. Yeah. All right. Have you? I'm asking Niels on this one. Have you come across the Dear John email, the kind of goodbye email? I'm asking the question. Just put it into the comments if you ever come across it. Nope. All right. Tell you what. Let me finish this and I'll get that and I'm going to show it to you. What that is essentially is, I just need to dig it up, make sure I have it here on my laptop. It's an email that you send them, which basically says, can I close the file? There is a very short version of it called the 9-word email, which is, have you passed or have you decided not to go ahead? That's the short email. And there's no thanks, no please, nothing, just, have you decided on pass? Have you decided to pass? Is one. There's another one that's much longer. I'll share an example with you as soon as I can find it. Let me finish off this and then I'll come back to you, Niels. So that's your competition is cheaper. Don't go after it. You could say, yep, they are cheaper. In fact, you know what? Considerably cheaper. The question, Mr. Prospect, is What do you need to get from us for you to feel comfortable paying more, because we're never cheapest? And you don't move off that position. Now, there's a process to this, which I'm going to share with you next, right? But that's certainly how I would interact with a prospect on something like that. What was the next one? Was, hot potato. Hot potato is, our budgets have been cut. And what they want you to do at a psychological level, they're expecting you to rescue them. It's like, here's my problem, now it's your problem, you solve it. And of course, with this, we always want to put the problem back where it belongs, which is with the buyer. It's not our problem. Remember, so fundamental truths here. They're the ones with the problem. You're the one with the solution. Why is it your job now to come along and solve their problem, which is coming up with the money? And of course, it's only a tactic. It's never true, not when it's used in this context. And so very simply, I would say, I have used this more than once and it has never failed. And you say, maybe we ought to wait until the budgets are in better shape. That's it. Buyer says to you, look, our budgets have been cut, or any kind of form of that. You say, look, that's a shame. Maybe we ought to wait until they're in better shape. And then zip it and you see what. Next, whoever speaks next loses. It's as simple as that. I guarantee you that if you've done your job right in the sales process and they want what you have, they're coming back and going, well, look, we might need to go back and revise it, and they'll squirm. But you've got them on that one. Don't move an inch on it. In fact, that is the first stage of how we deal with that kind of price pressure, which I'm going to move on to next. All right, and then I'll come back to you, Niels, on that. I just need to dig it up. I know it's here somewhere. Okay, let's look at this. So here's a 3-stage process for dealing with these kind of scenarios, whether it's your competition is cheaper, or you give me your best and final offer, et cetera, any of these. Is, if you think about it, if you think about how people in medieval times built castles, they always had a 3-stage defense. You would have, typically around the outside of the castle, you'd have a moat, and it would look like this. And so that the purpose of the moat was to slow people down. Only so many people could come across at any one time. And as they were slowed down, you'd have the archers at the top firing down arrows. That was the first line of defense. And then what people would have to do, they'd have to put ladders and scale up the wall. And as they were doing that, they'd have boiling water poured down on top of them, or boiling oil poured down on top of them. And that was a second line of defense. And then once they scaled the wall, obviously a lot of them were cut down at that point. But any others who managed to get over the wall, then it was arm-to-arm combat. And I think we need a similar process, a similar structure in negotiation, that when a professional comes at you, that we want something to slow them down. It's not going to stop them. It might stop, actually, your average buyer. And by average, I mean the head of IT, or the head of sales or marketing, or finance, logistics, whatever it is in an organization. Their focus is getting up and running with a new system and getting the benefits of it. It's not their money. They really don't care about it that much. So even if they do, because they're negotiators, that's just how they like to haggle. With those, they fall very quickly when you push back. And so here's the 3 stages that we're going to put in place with a buyer in a scenario like this. The first stage is give them nothing but a stroke and reassurance. Might sound something I hate, Jim. Listen, I knew you're a good negotiator, but I just want to assure you that for the volumes you're buying in, you're getting the best deal possible here. That's it, and that's all it is. Some form of just smile at them, lighten it up, and then reassure them that they're getting a really good deal. That look, you're not, and that can come in any form of words. It could be something like, look, I just want to assure you that you're not going to be embarrassed by finding out that you could have got it cheaper elsewhere. This is a really good deal. Now, there are some people who will go, well, look, I just had to ask. There's going to be some, but not the procurement people. It's not designed to stop the procurement people. It's designed to signal that they're now with a player. This is a really important concept when dealing with professional procurement. This idea of the game and playing the game. Think about it. Think about those of you who like to play chess. Imagine 2 scenarios. Scenario one is you're with somebody or you're playing against somebody who's not skilled at all. They've only just learned to play the game. And you're skilled, and this game is over in 6 moves, checkmate, done. That's game A. Game B is very different. You're up against a skilled opponent. And this game is not over in 6 moves. This game goes on for hours. And not alone that, but there's great banter and repartee. There's a mutual respect for each other's skill. And there's a warm conversation as you play. Regardless of who wins the game, which game do you enjoy more, A or B? Right? It's always B, always. And there's a sense of that with professional procurement people as well, there is a mutual respect for people who, when they find somebody they want to negotiate with, it's like game on, and they enjoy the game, they live for the game. And so this is a signal to them that, okay, the game is now started. And it's like when you move your first chess piece. That's all it is. They're now going to move, and they're going to push back a little bit further and say, well, look, appreciate that, Paul. However, our budgets have been cut, or we're going to be buying in these volumes, or whatever they're going to come back with. It really doesn't matter. They're going to come back with more pressure. And switch the case, then we move on to step number 2, which is where we give nothing but sweat. And what I mean by that is, that's where we get into these scenarios where, let's say somebody says, well, look, our budgets have been cut. Look, I can appreciate that. Maybe we ought to wait until they're in better shape. Or maybe we ought to just push this out into the next fiscal year. And then you shut up. Now that's part of this kind of, we're now in the game, and it's a tactic and counter tactic. And that's what I call it, is sweat. You're exhausted after half an hour of that kind of back and forth with somebody and countering their tactic. And I remember there was a guy, I'll give you an example how at the back and forth of this. I remember a guy years ago, now this particular tactic is unique to my business, but he was asking me for a discount, and I said to him, look, I said, didn't you tell me when we spoke last week that your salespeople gave a lot of discounts away and used discounts to get deals over the line? And he goes, yeah, absolutely. That's what I want you to do. He says, well, I said, and you want me to spread that disease around your organization? And he just laughed, right, straight away. But then he came back. This is what I mean by the counter. And he says, well, look, he says, Paul, only you and I know. Okay. Well, I said, that is true, I said, but, I just feel like a fake. And do you really want to fake in front of your people? And he just laughed. It was this surrender. And I'll give you another example of this scenario where there's a back and forth. Was a colleague of mine, I say colleague, I worked with this woman for a while. She was extraordinary, great salesperson. And she worked in software sales. And she was telling me of a story. She was in front of these bankers, procurement people from a bank. And if you've ever been in front of procurement people, I think retail are at the top of the heap in terms of Rottweilers. A banker close behind. And they were beating her up because whatever price she was charging for this suite of software, they were saying, well, look, we're not using all of the elements of this, so why are you charging us so much? And that's what they said to her. Look, how dare you come in here and have the temerity to charge us this amount when all we're using is this functionality and this module and this module? And she just looked at him. She says, yeah, I understand your dilemma. She said, I had the same problem myself. I have a 5-bedroom house. In fact, my mortgage is with this bank. I have a 5-bedroom house, and my son has just moved out to college and he won't be back. I'm now only using 4 of the bedrooms. Do you think I could get a discount on my mortgage? And their reaction was just to laugh, because she used their logic against them. And of course, in that scenario, the logic just fell flat on its face. So that's what I mean by this back and forth, give nothing but sweat. So you don't give an inch, you don't give any discounts, you push back. And that to a professional procurement person is game on. That's what they enjoy, and that's when you get respect. If you roll over, one is they don't respect you. 2, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So if you give something away, then all they're going to do is come back and look for more. But they do it without any respect either. It's just like, don't do it. It's just not worth it. We're now at stage 2. The third step of the framework is, this is where we then are open to trading. However, there are some rules that go with this. The rules are quid pro quo, never give anything unless you get something of equal or greater value in return. That's just an absolute bottom line rule of concession giving. There's another one is planning and preparation, where you figure out beforehand what are the concessions that are of high value to the customer or the prospect, but don't cost you a lot. Maybe could be an extended warranty, or it could be some additional training or hand holding or whatever it is. And then you look at what are the kind of concessions that they could give you that are of high value to you but don't cost them a lot. It might be extended contract, instead 3-year term instead of a 1-year term, for example. Or it could be including things like testimonials, that they'll do a video with you, for example. Doesn't cost them anything, but could be of high value to you depending on where your business is. But you have to know these things in advance, because they won't come to you in the moment. You have to plan them out. And in fact, and this is the thing I want to give away at the end of today's session, is I came across, when I was in Motorola, there was a commodity manager who came back from a procurement training. And he had this planning document. And I remember looking at it going, my God, it was astounding to me that procurement people put so much preparation into negotiating with vendors. And I took the document and kind of made a mirror image of it. In other words, made sure that whatever they were preparing, we prepared as much, and added to it and sandarized it and brought in some components of some of the things we've already talked about. So this is the document here that I'm going to share with you. So that's just it's a negotiation plan. So what in the document, what we've got here are sources of leverage. So you're going down, what belief will you need to maintain to ensure a productive outcome? That's I'm financially independent and I don't need the business. That's a belief as a form of leverage that you can maintain in a negotiation. So I have some examples here, and then your plan, down needs. What have you done to increase the perceived value of your solution? What else could you do? Emotion. What is your personal strategy to ensure that negotiation pressures don't result in unilateral one-way concessions? What are your triggers? What are the kind of things that make you give stuff away? Time. What steps have you taken to turn time into an asset instead of a liability? In other words, focusing the prospect on their deadlines, their timelines, rather than yours. That's hugely important. Relationship. What have you done? I'm not going to go through all of these. You can see it yourself. And then there's an action step. So after that kind of inventory that you take, you go and you say, okay, well, I need to do X, Y, and Z. The opportunity itself, negotiation planner, your fundamental needs, the alternative ways these needs can be met, relative strengths, relative weaknesses, anticipated issues, ideas and possible solutions of alternative approaches, hard questions you can expect, your planned response, questions to ask. Then you're looking at the buyer's fundamental needs here, the buyer's relevant costs, etc. And then down into, this is where you do your planned concessions. And you're looking here at the concessions that you could give other than discount. And you're looking at their perceived value to the prospect. And then you're looking at the cost, the perceived value to you and the cost to the buyer. Again, you want the ones that have high perceived value to you, low cost to the buyer. And then the opposite is your concessions, one that have high perceived value to the buyer but low cost to you. And you plan those out and you can document them as you go through it. Then I have here buyer gambits. When somebody says your price is too high, how do you respond? You'll need to do better than that. It's called a Kissinger. We need to check and get back to you, higher authority, and so on. And so that's the document that I would always refer to when planning for a big negotiation. Anything, I'm not talking about haggling over a 2% discount, but going into a big deal where there's real stakes on the table. I would certainly use that. And I'm going to give away that to anybody, and I'll tell you how you can get it at the end of the session today. We have only a few minutes left. So what else do we want to do? So that is the what do I want to say? The what we call the mobile defense plan. It's a 3-step process for dealing with price pressure. 1, you just smile at them, stroke and reassurance. That's all it is. 2, Don't give anything except sweat. Now you're going back into the kind of the give and take. And then the third step is where you trade, but only according to the plan that you've already done. So that's it. That's the areas that we're going to cover. I have just 8 key takeaways that I wanted to cover with you briefly. Then I'm going to tell you how you can get the planner document. First one is adopt the right mindset. That is so important. You're financially independent. You don't need the business. You have to detach from the outcome. It's the reason why doctors don't operate on their own family. It's the reason why solicitors don't defend themselves in court, is that if you're emotionally involved, you're screwed. So you have to detach your mindset and financially, always like be third party. That's takeaway number 1. Number 2, style can be more important than substance. How you do something, how you present something, like you smile and you lighten a situation, you stroke, compliment the other person, you soften them up. That's all style, and that can be hugely important as well to somebody who likes to play a game, which most negotiators do. Third one, your counterpart must feel like a winner. I know this was called win-win negotiations, but that's often misunderstood. It's almost seen that it's like a pie, and that if you get 50% and they get 50%, that's win-win. It's like, let's compromise. That's not win-win, because you could always call that lose-lose. You've lost 50%, they've lost 50%, if you think about it. Win-win is different. Win is where somebody feels like a winner, and that's only achieved when they've had to fight for every inch, for every centimeter that they've given. They have to work really hard for. And that's why it's so important to have that 3-step plan, that when they come through it, you finally start to trade, it's a relief to them. It's like a reward that they finally got there. It's like, we all know this, that the inch that you have to work really hard for is more valuable just than the foot or the yard or the mile that just somebody gave up without any fight whatsoever. So somebody must feel like a winner. They have to feel like they've earned it. And they only do that when you put them through that process and you push back. Now, how you push back, that's what we mean by style. You have to do it with style. Not aggressive, not arrogant, but not obsequious or wimpy on the other end, but assertive. Assertive with a smile goes a long way in negotiation. What else have we got? Stay objective. Absolutely. Don't get emotionally hooked into this thing. It's hard to do sometimes. As I said, I've been there where I've got very little money left, but when you can stay objective and just see it as a task in hand and emotionally detach, you can be very successful. What else? Focus on your goal. Now, most people often go in, they won't really have a goal. What they have is they have in mind a piece of ass that they want to come away with, meaning that they're going in with a price here and they're willing to drop it down to a certain level and maybe a little bit more, and if they get away with that, they feel good. That's not a goal. That's not a goal. A goal is going in and figuring out, first of all, in a selling situation, getting all the leverage that you can muster going in. And a goal is to come out not alone without any concessions, but have the negotiator feel good about the process. That should be the ultimate goal. Whether you have to give concessions or not is another story. If you do, you only do it because you got something out of equal or greater value in return. No question. Bottom line rule. What else? Strict quid pro quo. I've just said it. Like, you never ever give anything unless you get something of equal or greater value in return. The best way to know whether you've got something of equal or greater value in return is when you have it on your planner, where you figure that out in advance and you know exactly that you're going to get something of equal or greater value in return. Step 7, prepare. I can't say it enough that it really is, the fortune favors the prepared mind, and it's true of negotiation. If you go in unprepared, a procurement person will wipe the floor with you. Just look at the kind of things that they prepare. If you go in unprepared, you're dead. No question about it. So, what have we got? Stop believing that price is the real issue. Price is never the real issue. It isn't. It's not their money, but it is their ass on the line if something goes wrong. That's a bottom line rule of selling and negotiation. It's not their money. And people will happily pay more of other people's money just to protect their own ass. And you've seen it before. I've seen it where you go in and you're persuaded to give discount, and then you end up losing the deal to somebody who actually charged more. It happens all the time. So you got to stop believing. I'm going to finish on this very, very quick illustration of that. It was a few years ago. It was a Chamber of Commerce event, and I was giving a talk on negotiation. And I was expecting, I don't know why, it was my fault. I didn't ask who was going to be in the room. I just assumed it was going to be all business owners, as is typical in these Chamber of Commerce meetings. And I went in, but was kind of surprised to see there was, when I say business owners, these are people who run small business. So they're sellers in effect. They're out, insurance agents and so on. But there was a good few procurement people in the room as well. They'd obviously seen the title and had come along. And I remember doing this exercise was, I listed out a lot of things that are important to buyers. Things like quality, service, value for money, price, ease of doing business, flexibility, so on and so on. It was a list of about 10 items. And it was just an exercise I did at the beginning. I asked people to rank them in the order that was important to them. And got them back, and as I kind of filtered them through, realized very quickly that there was one group, and price was number 1 and number 2 in all of them. And then if I separated out everything else, all of the other ones that didn't have prices 1 or 2, price was way down the list. I'm talking 7th or 8th place down the list. And this was surprising. So as I interacted with this audience, I figured out that it was all the procurement people who had price way down the list. And it was all the sellers who had it number 1, number 2 on the list. And I remember it was a guy, business owner in the room, kind of, when I was sharing this with him, kind of exasperated, looked around and he says, why do we have it as number 1, number 2, when these guys, these procurement people have it way down their list? I'll never forget it. It was this, and it was kind of a smarmy, kind of knowing smile. This procurement manager went and he goes, because that's what we want you to believe. And he felt so cocky and so self-assured. But I thought it was so telling that they want you to believe the price is the real issue. It's not. All right, I'm done. If we have any questions, Paul, did you find the longer? Oh, yeah, thanks. I'm going to share that with you. So as I do this, I'll tell you about these. I'm going to find this email. And so just bear with me 1 second. While I'm doing that, I'm going to say to you, let me see, where was the email? I know where it is. I'm going to open it up here on this laptop. You can have that document, that planner I was sharing with you. You can have that. All you need to do is go onto LinkedIn when this webinar is finished. And on LinkedIn, you go on my profile, you have to go down to the bottom, just scroll down. It should automatically open up, but if it doesn't, just go into LinkedIn and go down. And if you give this webinar an endorsement, say, look, I attended, I got some value from it, I will automatically send you that planning document as a thank you. Now, while I say that, I'm going to go and find this email. So stay there, don't go away. I'll be back in less than a minute. Okay, I have found this. I think here we go. All right. Hi, Mark. So this is an email I sent to this guy who I had met. So here's the context. I think it's important to just give some context first. And it sounds to me like your situation was similar. I had met with the guy, I had met with him, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to meet with him. Phone call is fine. But you've had some interaction and you've uncovered some needs. That's the base level. And then the other important thing is that you've followed up, you have sent emails, you've left voicemails and nothing back. That's the scenario. That's what happened to me in this. And this is the email I sent. And it's funny, I was talking about this with a group only on Friday. And I'll tell you what one guy did, which I thought was just genius. I really, really liked it. I'll tell you about that when I finish. He took this exact same email that I'm going to share with you right now, and he's been using that quite a while. He said it always works, but he's taken it up to another level, and I'll share that with you as soon as I give you the baseline. So here we go. Wrong one. Hi, Mark. A while back, we talked about developing your staff in Dublin through ongoing reinforcement training, and it sounded like we might have a fit. It's been quite some time since we spoke, and I've had trouble reaching you by phone. Again, that was true at the time, pre-COVID times, right? But that first line is the only thing that you need to change. Just put your own scenario in there. Look, we spoke, sounded like we might have a fit, and it's always your fault. You know, I've had trouble reaching you. That's it. That's enough. Now, so the next thing is, what you're doing with the next few lines is you're covering all your bases. My guess is we're out of touch for one of 4 reasons. Your priorities have changed. That's valid. That could happen. 2, it only sounded like a fit to me. In other words, I got it wrong. 3, you decided to go with another option, but you're too nice to break the bad news to me. And 4, you're desperately trying to reach me, but you're trapped under a heavy object and you cannot reach the phone. And that line, by the way, some people are uncomfortable with it. That's the most important line because it lightens up the tone of the entire thing. And I've seen people customize it, but they keep the integrity of the humor. And I think that's really important. I consider it a personal favor if you'd let me know if the problem is one of these or something I didn't think of. In other words, you've now just covered all your bases, all of them. And said, regards, Paul. P.S. If it's number 4, reply and I'll send help. That's just another little kind of lighthearted humor. So essentially, you're making it easy for them to tell you the truth. And sometimes that's, for example, here is the response to that email. It's here somewhere. Hang on. Sorry, it's on this laptop. Let me just pull this up. Here we go. Hi, Paul. The good news is that it isn't number 4. The bad news is more of a blend of 1 or 3. I ended up withdrawing from the sales, yada, yada. Basically, he's saying, you know, thanks, but no thanks. And he says, hope all is well with you and your family. Hear nothing but bad news about your country. But then again, how bad can it be when you're always within 100 yards of a Guinness? That was sent quite a while ago, actually. It's not something I tend to use a lot now. I've probably used this 18 years I've been doing this, maybe 10 times in total. And I made a hymns of it once. I sent it to somebody and he says, you forgot number 5. I was on holidays. And I just didn't leave long enough. You do need to leave a good 3, maybe 4 weeks before you send this from the kind of last jumping off point. Particularly if you send it during the summer. Well, nobody's going on holidays anymore. However, if you want me, I can certainly send that over to people as well. I can send it out when we send out the recording. I can send it out to people. Oh yeah, I was going to say the last thing I was going to share with you, and then we are up on time, I promise you. The 9-word email is, have you decided to pass? Or are you still interested in? That's it. Nothing more. Regards, Paul. And then the other thing I said, well, the guy took it to the next level is he put a little GIF, and it was, I think it was Snoopy playing with Frisbee, but he's playing with nobody else. And the guy goes, he says, okay, he says, I admit it, I'm defeated. And then when he used the you're trapped under a heavy object, he had this guy came back to him, as they always do. They always come back with a response. Sometimes it's no thanks, sometimes it's sorry, I was really busy, but it's still valid. But the guy came back with a little gif as well. It was 2 eyes peeping out from underneath a rock. He says, so glad to hear you're not trapped under a heavy object. And I just thought that's next level humor, where you're using animated gifs to communicate emotion in an email like that. I certainly liked it. So that's it, folks. Paul, where on LinkedIn do you want us to post a review? If you just go to, not endorsements, but testimonials, it's down at the bottom. And you'll see there's several there already. And if you just go in there, and I think it's a kind of give Paul a testimonial, and just, you know, whatever your impressions of the webinar is. If it's a good one, I'll post it. If it's a bad one, I'll delete it. But either way, I will send you the document, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's just down at the bottom. If you're having trouble, let me know and I'll send you the link. That's it, folks. I think we are out. We're certainly over time. I hope you got something out of that. I know it was kind of head to the fire hose stuff, but it's a big topic and it's a short amount of time. So if you have any questions on it, you want anything, I will send people the recording. If there's anything else you need, do drop me a line and I'll get back to you. But with that said, I think we'll close the webinar and I'll see you in the next. Oh, I knew there was something else I had to do. It was this. I'm doing one in November on the, here we go. It's on the 5th of November. The 10th of November at 3 o'clock Irish time, 4 o'clock CET. And it's on developing a 30-second commercial, like an elevator pitch. And what I'll be doing on that is I will take your business, I will do it live with people. So I will develop your 30-second commercials live. I'll do a number of them on the webinar. So I'll obviously explain what I'm doing and then take those inputs, and I don't know how many we'll get through, maybe 10, 15, but if you want to register for that, go click on the QR code or you'll be able to get details of it on our website as well. But just take a picture of that or take a screenshot of the QR code. If you can't find the link, send me an email and I'll send you a link to the registrations, but that's there. All right, folks, that's it. I'm not seeing the option for testimonials. I think we may need to. Oh, you do. Sorry, David. Yes, you. Just connect with me on that one. You do have to be connected. All right, folks, that's it. I'm going to leave you with that, and I will see you hopefully on November the 10th for those elevator pitches. Till then, take care.